May 8th regular meeting of the Lompoc Planning Commission to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the Commission. Start out with Commissioner Cioni,
Here.
Commissioner Gonzalez,
Present.
Commissioner Bridge. Present. And Commissioner Braxton.
Present. All right, I guess we're gonna open it to oral communications. This is a chance to address the commission on an item that is not on the agenda. I'm also going to do my usual reminder just once of the phone number that people can call from home. It's 805-875-8201. Again, 805-875-8201. Is there anyone here that wanted to make a comment during the oral communications? All right, seeing no one rises, is there anyone on the phone?
Chair, there's no one on the phone.
Thank you. So we're going to close oral communications, move into a consent calendar. We're going to approve the minutes of the Lompoc Planning Commission regular meeting of April 10, 2024. Can we get a motion?
A motion to approve the meeting minutes from the April 10th, 2024 meeting.
Do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second it.
All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, the minutes, April 10th, are approved. I'm going to move to the first public hearing item, which is a sign permit review, SGN 2024-0003, for Tractor Supply Company signage in the Mission Plaza Shopping Center. Can we have a staff report, please?
Yes, good evening, Chair, Commissioners. I am presenting a request from Steve Fear from Coast Monument Signs for the review of the proposed wall and monument signs for the Tractor Supply Company associated with the existing sign program in the Mission Plaza Shopping Center, located in the planned commercial development and H Street overlay zoning districts. Mission Plaza Shopping Center is located at the northeast corner of North H Street and East Central Avenue, and Tractor Supply will be located at the 1600 of North H Street. Surrounding uses include River's Edge Pet Lodge and vacant land to the north, residential uses to the east, commercial and more shopping centers to the south, and to the west across H Street is hotels and fast food restaurants. Per the Mission Plaza sign program, Section D states all signage of major tenants shall be reviewed and approved by the City Planning Commission. Major tenants under 1B include Albertsons, Ross, and Mervyn's, which is becoming Tractor Supply Company. Current conditions: the frontage of the sign building, which is currently vacant, and the two monument signs. The one on the right is the one that is located at the corner of H and Central, and the one on the left is the one that's on North H Street. The proposed sign locations: sign A is the first monument sign on the corner of North H Street and Central Avenue in front of the gas station. Monument sign B, the second monument sign, is at the shopping center entrance that is off of North H Street. And sign C is the actual wall sign on the Tractor Supply building. The proposed sign monument modifications include removing the Mervyn's, which is still on the monument signs, and replacing it with the Tractor Supply Company panels. The sign that is on the corner of Central and North H is single-sided. It only faces out to the corner, where the second monument sign on H Street is dual-sided, so it will have two panels being replaced. The wall sign is measures 48 inches tall and has 23.94-inch letters. The graphic that I have shows it's on like a panel, which it is not. It is actually separate channel letters, which are, there's a mock on the dais, Chair Chioni?
Yeah, we have an E here.
Yes, a big E.
Yep.
They'll be
So-
slightly larger than that, but that is a representation of it.
There's no E in Tractor Supply Company.
No, no, there's not. This action is exempt from environmental review pursuant to Section 15061B3, Review for Exemption of the California Environmental Quality Act Guidelines. Staff review finds that the proposal of the monument sign panels with text of 5 inches meets the requirements listed in the sign program that states that the letters be no more than 9 3/4 inches, and for the proposed wall sign that contains a 48-inch logo and channel letters that are 23.94 inches with a height of 47.8 inches double stacked. These dimensions do not exceed the allowed maximum height of 48 inches per the sign program. So as depicted and described in the attached sign proposal plan set, the proposed signs meet the sign standards for the zoning code and the Mission Plaza sign program and the city's architectural review guidelines, and therefore staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 1003, parens 24, for sign permit review, SGN 2024-0003, based on the findings, fact, and the resolution. That concludes my presentation, and I will be available for any questions, but Planning Manager Brian Halverson would like to
Oh, okay, thank you.
I
add.
just wanted to end it with this small piece of information. So I don't think you recall ever reviewing signs on the commission. So we're doing some research. There's actually 5 more sign programs in addition to this, would be 6, that have certain provisions either in the development plan that had conditions of approval, the resolution, or the sign program itself. So we're going to bring an item back in the future, if the commission is okay with that, to have amendments to those sign programs, since those are usually done at a staff level. But right now, we're kind of stuck with the wording that's in here, even though the zoning code differs than this. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Thank you. Do we have any questions before we open to public comment?
I just have one,
Sure.
just a quick question. On item 2, it says it's in substantial compliance. Does that imply there's something that's,
It's not, I think it's just standard wording.
Okay. I guess we're going to open for public comment. Is the applicant here? Usually they go first. Do you want to? You're going to have to come to the podium. And please state your name for the record when you're there. More letters.
I'm Steve Fear with Coast Monument Signs.
Thank you.
And so this is called a day and night application on the face. So during the day, it'll look black. At night, if you can see, it's got little pinholes in it. And it looks white at night. It's a really cool option. Now these colors on the side are different than what, they're going to be black on the side. But I just wanted to show you this. This is another job I'm doing. Other than that, it'll clean up that monument sign out there. We'll remove that Mervyn's and put that nice panel in. I don't know if you noticed, but it has a texture on it, and we're going to texture it the same as the monument sign. And the letters will also have the day and night. And then mount the new sign on the wall. And it's just flush mounted on there with no panel like she had said. So that's about all I have, unless you have any questions.
Wonderful, thank you.
That's all that will be.
Oh, okay,
Just
there is a
not-
question, sorry, from,
Is it just going to be the little Mervin's block? Or will that whole thing, like where Albertsons and then the Ross, will that, because it kind of looks,
It'll just be where the Mervin's is.
Okay.
On the monument signs. Yeah,
Okay.
we're gonna cut that panel out and then put our new panel over that, and that'll allow the light to come through and light up those letters.
great.
and Brian, will they eventually give that thing kind of like some TLC? Because you're fixing that one part, but then the rest of it kind of looks,
Could use a paint job on
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So that I don't have any control over, but
Okay,
that would be a good thing to do.
thank you.
You bet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
like,
that was a
would-
question to Brian.
Would that be something, because, you're putting there, because I was over there the other day at Taco Bell, and it kind of looks like an eyesore. So you're putting this nice new Tractor Supply in there, and then, the rest of it's going to look like doesn't match.
Yeah, that's a good question, Commissioner. So before the sign permit is approved, we'll make sure that that's addressed, but you're right. Maybe Steve can address if the whole thing is gonna be repainted. I know it's gonna have a stucco finish, but repainted so the whole thing is fresh as opposed to just the Tractor Supply. Maybe you can clarify that,
Yeah, I can get that through.
if you want to just speak into that microphone.
I can work with the people I'm working with and say that's a stipulation, and I'm sure they would probably say, okay, let's paint it, but I would have to check with them. And everything's stuccoed on there, and the stucco's in pretty good shape. It just needs a paint job.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right, so any opposition to entertaining a motion or any other?
Okay. I motion to adopt resolution number 1003-24 approving SGN 2024-003.
All right, do you have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, motion passes 4-0. And we move then to item number 2, Planning Commission recommendations to the City Council for the adoption of the general plan environmental justice element. Please have a staff report, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, in your staff report, this item is a little bit long, so I'm going to try to go through it as quickly as possible. It's also a new topic area for Lompoc. So we also have our consultant that helped us draft the environmental justice element, Midier Harnish, is live streaming, watching this right now. So if there are some questions that I can answer, they are the expert and they helped us to create this new element to the general plan. So I just wanted to preface it with that they are on standby. Sometimes I have problems with this. And might need your help, Sharda, wherever she is, to advance the slides. Let's see. What was that?
If he's leaving, does he need this back?
Yeah, he probably does. Yep. Could we take a very quick break so I can figure out why the tech
Sure,
isn't
no
working?
problem.
Thank you. All right, we got it to work, so if you want to
All right, let's.
I have an unofficial
resume.
question.
Oh.
Why are we being photographed? Oh,
Yeah, we were not aware of this, so.
Okay, let's resume.
Okay, thank you. Again, this is the general plan environmental justice element being considered by the Planning Commission this evening. And there it goes again. I know I'm not touching it. It's very, very touchy.
The other button, the one,
Yes,
the down arrow. That's the up arrow.
there we go. I guess I went back and forth, but maybe I didn't do it that time. Okay, so right now, tonight, we're asking for recommendations from the Planning Commission to present or to give your recommendations to the City Council for this new element of the general plan. So a lot of people, starting off this topic, want to know what is environmental justice. So I've simply stated the government code section that states the state of California defines environmental justice as the fair treatment of people of all races, cultures, and incomes with respect to development, adoption, implementation, and enforcement in environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So Senate Bill 1000, you can see it on the screen there, recognizes that the planning profession has the power to influence health and safety equity outcomes across communities. And so SB 1000 was passed to address those issues. So one of the key issues in environmental justice is first starting out with identifying disadvantaged communities. So disadvantaged communities is covered in the plan, and it's defined as an area identified by the California Environmental Protection Agency pursuant to section 39711 of the Health and Safety Code, or an area that is a low-income area that is disproportionately affected by environmental pollution and other hazards that can lead to negative health effects. So we're going to get into that in just a little bit. So another question that comes up is why add a new element? Well, first of all, the commission is very aware that we are working on amending several elements of the general plan. You've seen the housing element. We're working on amendments to the safety element. We're also working on amendments to the circulation element. So we're working on a lot of different things. If you're going to amend 2 or more elements, the law says you need to update your general plan to address environmental justice. We chose a standalone element. You can also integrate policies, goals, and programs throughout your general plan, but it is easier for the public, also with staff when we're working with the public, to have a standalone element, so we chose that route. And then lastly, there's no surprises that there are some concerns in our community. So one of the key things that we always do is we reach out to the public, make sure they're involved, give them opportunities to voice their concerns. So we had a pop-up event last year at our Lompoc Community Market. We actually got some really good input that I'll get into in a little bit. We did a community workshop at Lompoc High School. The attendance wasn't good, but we went out there and wanted to make sure that we got into that area because that is an area that has disadvantaged communities. We had surveys, and of course, we have our project website that does e-blasts that notifies people of what's going on and provides newsletters and flyers and things like that. So the way that we were able to identify these environmental justice communities is these agencies, the California Office of Environmental Health and Hazard Assessment, and of course U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, they put out these websites with data sets and a lot of information. And I'm going to dive into a little bit, but because it's a lot, I'm not going to go into it extensively. So, moving on, once we found the areas that had disadvantaged communities, we called that the community focus, and that's basically an area that has certain census tracts. The city is broken up into census tracts. And in those areas, You have lower incomes, you have lower levels of education, higher proportions of minority residents, and a disproportionately large burden of exposure to environmental hazards. And those we'll call iniquities can lead to a disproportionate amount of pollution burdens, health impacts, and socioeconomic barriers. We have 5 census tracts in Lompoc in that community of focus. So that's the area right there on the community focus area that we're going to talk about quite a bit. Essentially, that area, it's hard to see, but you can see it a little clearer in your hard copy if you brought it this evening. But essentially, to the north of the boundary, you have North Avenue, then the south is Ocean Avenue. You have the San Ynez River to the east, and then to the west, to the west you have V Street, although it does go out a little bit farther than that to the west. So that's the area we're going to be talking about a lot tonight. I'm sorry, could you repeat that in your microphone, maybe turn it on?
You meant the south of North and the north of Ocean, correct?
Correct. Yep, that is correct. So this actually shows the different census tracts that I was alluding to earlier. The tracts in the community of focus, which were outlined in the previous slide, are tracts 2703, 2705, 2706, 2709, and 2710. And you can see those numbers on the screen. So I'm going to dig into a little of this. Try not to bore you too much because it is a lot, but I'm going to just really quickly skim through some of these areas that are a lot more in detail in the document. But I thought it would be important to just really quickly, briefly talk about those areas. First of all, the map that I showed you, that area is 51% of the city's population that reside in the community of focus. So I also wanted to emphasize that last month I went to a board meeting at the Space Force base, and they are also working on an environmental justice element. They came up with the same tracks that we came up with, areas that have disadvantaged communities, so we're right in line with what they're doing. They're early on in the process right now. They're doing their public outreach plan. We did ours last year, and they started theirs this year. So in this area, getting to some of the things that are on the screen. So the area that is in the community of focus, I already mentioned the population. Those areas are also very dense, denser than other areas of the city. They're largely Hispanic or Latino. That's the largest racial ethnic group. In regards to incomes, incomes are much lower in that area. And we're comparing it to the overall city income and also the income that is in the county. There's also a higher percentage of residents living in poverty. Specifically, tract 2705 has the lowest income, and tract 2710 has the highest percentage of poverty. So, and then getting into educational attainment, for those areas, they're lower. The educational attainment is lower compared to both the overall city and the county. One of the tracts has the lowest level of educational attainment, with 45% holding a high school degree or higher, and only 2.8% of its residents holding a bachelor's degree or higher. Second to last is the language that's spoken. I mentioned already that Spanish is a large percentage of the speakers in that community. Tract 2710, like I mentioned earlier, has the highest proportion of primarily Spanish speakers, making up approximately 67% of the population. Lastly, age. In tract 2705, that particular tract has the highest number of residents over 65 years old. Overall, the age distribution in the community of focus is comparable to the county, but with a higher percentage of children under the age of 15. So all those are very important as we dive into these other areas in regards to disadvantaged communities. So specifically in Lompoc, some of the concerns are related to pesticide use. There's no surprise that Lompoc has a lot of agricultural fields, both to the east and to the west. And so it's been talked about in the past that there's often pesticide drift because of the proximity to those fields. And when we had a workshop, there were people that specifically spoke on that topic. And if you have asthma or other health concerns, the ag uses can actually exacerbate some of those health conditions. So another item that was a concern is traffic proximity. There's no surprise that we're along two major state highways, 246 and 1. And so that particular issue came up. We had block groups, which are subgroups within the tracks, that had higher scores in that area, and they're specifically measuring noise and air pollution within 1,700 feet of a census block group. So there's impacts that are related to that as well. This is kind of an interesting one to me, but another one is a risk management plan, facility proximity. So you haven't seen a lot come before you, but there have been. When a project comes in or a business comes in that has hazardous materials, they're required to submit a hazardous materials plan. Most of the time, that's not open to the public, but they do have to submit it to the city. There's certain things we can allow the public to see, certain things we cannot. But essentially, EPA requires that extremely hazardous substances to develop those businesses have to develop a risk management plan. The plan helps in the event of an accident, say police and fire that need to report. And the scores, which Lompoc had some higher scores, are based on the number of facilities within 3 miles of a census block. The higher the score, the higher the probability to exposure to hazardous materials and waste increases. And one of the things that I didn't completely know, because I don't know everything that's going on in the city, is there are 3 facilities in town that kind of made those numbers go up. So one of the facilities in town is the city's water treatment plant. Another facility in town is the Lompoc Oil and Gas Plant. And lastly is Lompoc Valley Cooling. So that's an agricultural cooling facility. So those facilities will have hazardous materials and other things that, if there's an accident, they need to have that risk management plan. So, and then lastly is lead exposure. I'm sure we all are aware that lead was a very prominent metal that was used in the past, not anymore, but pipes and paint and all kinds of things. We used lead, gasoline. So when you looked at the environmental justice element, it's pretty interesting that 69% of the homes in Lompoc were built prior to 1980. So those homes have lead exposure because they're older, and if they're unrenovated, there's a high probability exposure to lead. So especially that could be damaging for young children. So those were the 4 issues that came up. So even though these didn't have high scores, they're worth noting for this presentation because some of them come up in projects. For example, you probably realize that a lot of times we're asking for trees to be planted in town, whether a new project comes in or a residential project, we'll often say, new trees. I think Taco Bell, we recommended some new trees, provide shade. It really helps with the aesthetics as well, carbon dioxide and all these good things. Right now, the city only has 2.61% of our land with tree canopy, so it's really low. Another one that the city needs improvement, but it wasn't necessarily meeting the high scores, was the housing cost burden. Comes up a lot in the media and the press, but if you are paying more than 50% of your household income is spent on housing, you're considered housing cost burden. All but one census tract, and that was since track 03, had over 45% of the households that are cost burdened, so that's pretty high. But relatively speaking, most of them didn't get that high. Lastly, the housing conditions, obviously as housing, the age of the housing, over time, more repairs and more things are going to need to be done with the homes. This is an area that needs improvement because the last time that we studied our housing stock was 2003. It's been a while. So we need to update and have a new report on the housing conditions in Lompoc so that we can better address some of the conditions that may be dilapidated, may need extensive repairs that are beyond sometimes the value of the structures. So I wanted to bring up that issue as well. Lastly, and probably the most important part of this presentation is what does all of this come down to? It comes down to adding new goals, new policies, and new programs that the planners, the community development department, and even the city manager's office, we're responsible for making sure that there's a way to address all these topics that I just presented tonight. So what we've come up with, using our consultant, using the data sets and everything that was studied, is new goals that focus on environmental justice, access to healthcare, healthy foods, and civic engagement. There's new policies that support that. In addition, there's policies that focus on transparent decision-making, engaging the community in budgeting and scheduling city events, and making public outreach materials available online, in person, and in Spanish. So some of the programs that we're proposing address capital improvement, prioritization, code enforcement, emergency housing repair program, and resource gaps. So we did we got comments, and they're attached to your staff report. There's 3 commenters, including, I thought it was really nice to get input from our local charter school, Trivian. They provided some comments. I actually failed to bring these boards. They're attached to your staff report, but when you scan them, sometimes they're a little light. If you want to see any of those boards, I could certainly go back into my office and grab those, but they are part of your packet. So that was good to see the school take an interest in environmental justice. So we did an addendum to our EIR where we updated the entire general plan. It's the same addendum that we did for the housing element, so that's attached as Exhibit A. It found that the potential environmental impacts of the focused general plan update are within the scope of the previously certified final EIR, and staff recommends the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council approve the addendum for the project with the findings required by CEQA contained in the resolution. So this does conclude my presentation, and we're recommending that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council adopt this new environmental justice element in accordance with Planning Commission Resolution 100124. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Halverson. I'm sure there are many questions, so I would say let's open up for public comment first, and then we'll bring it to us. So anyone, state your name for the record. We know you, but the rules.
Honorable Chair, Commissioners, Nicholas Gonzalez, resident of Lompoc. So I actually kind of nerdy on certain subject matters, been following this for several years before it actually became a policy. One of the items that concerns me is, well, first of all, I don't think we should protect people based on classes. I think we just need to protect the entire community, right? But there's some other viewpoints, so let's move forward. The pesticide issue. For once, we've heard this issue over and over again. I'm a free market guy. I hate government intrusion on anything. But now they have empirical data, because what they've done is they've actually gone out with the farm bureaus where there's mandatory reporting on the tonnage and the type of fungicides, pesticides, and they actually have the hard data, right? And so they're not establishing direct nexuses right now, but they could at least say, hey, you're using, if you look at these charts, your community is using 90% more pesticides than almost all the other communities in the state of California. in our past general plans, we have a lot of farm preservation, and we impose restrictions on the property owners adjacent to the farms and not the farming itself. I think if we're gonna really be mandated to look at environmental justice, we're gonna have to start looking at it at a different way. We're gonna start not putting restrictions on within the city, but expect some of our neighbors to start, monitoring their operations a little better. That, to me, falls within the spirit of environmental justice. Same thing goes for possible location of certain types of facilities. We don't see it often here, we're small, but in Oxnard, LA, you might have a large factory. Those generally go in the lowest cost areas where there's least resistance, which align with the high density, low income, low education areas. We did allow one large facility to come in right behind Walmart. It's probably great for jobs, but that's what made our score go artificially high because of the type of chemical that they use. It's a lethal chemical if you have exposure. It's immediate, It's hydrochloric something that's used out there. So one of the things also going back to general plan and planning is we clearly see here the correlation between low income, low education, high density, right? And right now in our general plan, we're bringing that back, that type of development back. And again, this is philosophical here, but I think it's important for us to put on a different mindset sometimes. And maybe we don't cluster this again. It's like we're regressing, not progressing. We're regressing to some of the styles. And here with these data sets, so out of something that we may think, it's useless, we're getting important data sets that we probably otherwise wouldn't have looked at. But there's a reason why we have the gang problem in those areas. There's a reason why crime is so high in those areas, right? There's a reason why so many of the social issues happen in those areas. When you create these concentrations of poverty, low income. So in planning, let's not do that. Let's try to disperse. I know Commissioner Bridge had mentioned before that he liked the idea of, like, when we were doing affordable housing, rather than having an in lieu fee, that you put it in there so we have a diversity of community all over rather than concentrations. I'll have to say I agree with that. The ADU model is a way to do that. So there's some things. I can think of one with density is trash pickup. In these areas, we have sometimes 5 times the density level of the average Lompoc, it's huge, the density's significantly lower, but the trash collection is the same. And so if you drive down these alleys of L, M, N, E, F, G, it's a total mess towards the end of the pickup cycle, exposing all the kids. They're basically living in a temporary dump, right? In these low income, low education, high crime. So these are the kind of things that when you're addressing your built environment and you're addressing how you're going to build something that you take in consideration. And it's something new. I know we're always hesitant to push away, but there's groups. Santa Maria has CAUSE and MyPOPEC. They're gonna, now that there's gonna be hard data sets, look for these outside agencies to come in and want to either litigate or negotiate to start addressing these underlying issues. So it's better to get in front of it than to fall behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. There's no one else in the room, but is there anyone on the phone?
No one is on the phone. When you're done, Chair, I do have one other item regarding an amendment.
Okay, so I'm going to close the public comment. And Brian, you said you have another item?
Yeah, just very quick. So on page 27, I'm going to go ahead and pass something out real quick.
27 of the element or 27 of the staff report?
So we found an error. So in page 27 of the element, and that's just a kind of a cross out from the consultant. But essentially, I'm going to read into the record so that later, when you guys make your recommendation, if you could, if you agree with me after I explain, that would be helpful. So the first sentence says the following: the community of focus has a significantly lower mean income compared to the county, with an average of $75,837 across all census tracts versus Santa Barbara County's mean income of $120,192. So that's proposed to be crossed out, and the reason is there was a public comment and staff noticed as well as the document went back and forth between the mean and the median. Those are different terms. So we wanted to stick with the median. That made more sense, and we updated some of the tables, but there is still some text that did get updated. And then on that same paragraph, there's a statement also we were proposing to delete that says, among the tracts in the community of focus, tract 2705 has the lowest mean, so there's that word mean again, income of $37,325, while tract 2710 has the highest percentage of residents living in poverty at 32.7%. So that statement would also be stricken, and that would be the proposed amendment, and that's the reason why.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to bring it to the commission. Who wants to start?
Looking at me?
I don't know.
Sure.
Commissioner Bridge, go ahead.
You know me, I always start. I kind of want to have an understanding of where we've actually found areas that we approached or were in non-compliance. And I think you listed there were 4 in the previous chart, right? Back one.
Are you talking about this slide?
Those are the actual areas you,
Concerns.
I took away from the reading. Well, maybe not actually exceeding the goals or the criteria. There were the areas of concern.
Correct.
So as a baseline on that, and maybe leveraging a little bit of what Nick said, I have a little bit of, let me back up just a little bit, and I'll use what you just discussed, which was the mean income or the median income. There were a lot of comparisons that allowed you to select the tracks you selected with Santa Barbara County. And what we were doing, or what we are doing, is subdividing the city and saying these areas require more attention because these areas are poor compared to Santa Barbara County. But our town is unique, our city is unique, and comparing us to Santa Barbara puts us in comparison with Montecito and Santa Barbara. And so I don't know if that's a fair discriminator. I'll put that up at the kind of at the top level of concern. And where it jumped out to me the most, if you go back to those 4, the risk management plan, you indicated we scored high on that because of the cooler. I think that's Campbell's cooler, probably.
One of them was the cooler, yeah, then the water treatment
And the
plant was another
wastewater
one.
treatment plant.
And then
Now,
an
Ben, if you
oil.
put the map up, there are areas that are much closer to those 2 operations that would put them at much higher risk of having an environmental injustice, if that's what we're trying to do, than someone sitting over in D Street between North and Ocean. And so the criteria seems to me, by trying to segment based on race or economics or whatever they are, we should be segmenting based on where those inequities occur. So I would expect, for example, the census tract of concern and the pesticide would be all along Bailey, or whatever that Floridale, or, you know, it would be, so, I don't know if the Willows is over there, or if the guys, yeah, Briar Creek, thank you. So, I'm not being very elegant here, but I'm not liking the way we're dividing up the risk.
And I want to piggyback, because a lot of what you're saying is what I'm thinking as well, right? So you also take that parcel, Glen Ellen, the Willows, Briar Creek. We're talking about pesticides, but in the risk management plan, right, we've had several concerned citizens in the community, right? The chemicals that are used at the cannabis facility over there, right? So does that fall into this risk management framework because you're using some harmful chemicals, no different than what's being done at the cooling plant?
So I'm kind of going at a top level down. At a top level, you've done a yeoman's job of dividing the census tracts. I'm not criticizing. I just think we have a mentality, you know, we see race in here everywhere. When I look at Lompoc, race is not an issue. You could say poverty's an issue, I'll accept that. You could say maybe there's an ethnicity kind of, but I don't see race as a big issue in our town. I see economic development being an issue, or living close to pesticides being an issue. So, so I have a little trouble with that, number one. Number two, tomorrow night you're having a big meeting. Well, are there any duplicates in here to the general plan? Because it felt like there were, like the buffer area. That seems like we've had that in the general plan forever.
I don't think tonight we have a
You don't think
buffer.
there's any dupes? Okay.
No, we could go to that page, though, and look at the policies, goals, and I don't think we include that. No, I don't think there's anything that's,
Okay, if you've taken that review, then I'll stand corrected on that. I thought I saw one area where we were establishing a goal to create a buffer around community areas.
so right now we have, we address healthy food, access to community resources, and then we have,
What about LU 8.5? And page number LU 9, I guess. What, are those what we're?
could you refer to what page in the
yes,
environmental
page
justice?
5.
Page 5? Oh, so you're not looking at the goals, policies, and, okay.
I'm not
So
sure
those
to
are the
be-
ones, so what we did is we looked at the existing general plan elements, and in those elements, we said these are goals, policies, and programs that already are supporting what we're doing in this element.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah,
they
so
are
those aren't the ones
They are
that,
dupes in a sense, but they're dupes because you're referencing them to it.
well, we're using that for consistency. So, and in order to change the general plan, you want to look at your baseline and what you have now. So the consultant as well as staff looked at those and said, we're already recognizing, you know, certain factors and certain issues and topics in our general plan, but not enough. And so that's why we have this new element, we have this new data.
So LU 8.5, what is that then?
That's the
Is
land
that a
use
general
element.
plan?
That's the land use element. So, hold on one second, we'll go to that page. LU what? Say that one more time?
LU, I think it's 8.5. I just picked that one, I'm not,
It's on page 5.
but maybe I'm
Oh,
not.
okay. The city, says the city shall require commercial, industrial, civic, and institutional development to be designed in ways that minimize conflicts with adjacent homes and neighborhoods. So,
I just picked that one, I'm not criticizing that one, I'm just, that seems like we've had that kind of wording in our general plan for,
yeah, that is in our general plan now. That's existing.
so is that a dupe?
No, we're just basically doing a survey of existing
This
goals,
is, this
policies,
says
and measures.
policies in other elements supporting environmental justice efforts. So these are already in our elements,
Gotcha.
but they support
So it's
this
just a
element.
reference?
Yeah.
Okay, that's then. So tomorrow, there's a meeting by the city council. It's a special meeting, I believe. And there's a series of recommendations coming in. Do you have any insight into what's going to happen in that meeting, or?
So we passed out to the planning commission as well as city council a while back, it was last year. Basically, and it's been since 2020, the city council, or 2 city council members looked at the general plan, did some markups and said, hey, can we change this? And staff looked at it and said, well, one, we don't have a budget, and we haven't done the environmental review. So we kind of sat on that, and unfortunately, I'll be guilty of that, but I want to be very courteous that we don't always have things scoped in the budget or staffing, so that was on hold for about 2 years, and then we hired a consultant to do all these updates to our general plan, including the housing element, and we asked them to scope in at least looking at those comments and then making some suggestions and recommendations. So, and I've done several presentations to the council just to keep them updated over the last 4 years. And so now it's come to a point where we're going to go back to those proposed amendments and see if we have some consensus from the council, since those were done by council members, and see what happens. And we're gonna have our environmental consultant at the meeting and the workshop, as well as the consultant that wrote this environmental justice element. Our community development director, the city manager will be there to basically hear from the entire council, not just 2 members, where do they want to go with these amendments? So that's essentially what the workshop will be.
So there's a chance that there will be amendments to the general plan that comes out of that?
Correct. But I don't think it will be this year, and I'll tell them that tomorrow night, because we already are working on 4 amendments. We can only do 4 a year, and we don't have a budget for any additional larger projects, especially when it comes to environmental review.
Well, when I read through that list, 2 things kind of jumped out at me. One was perhaps a movement away from as much protection of agricultural land. So I don't know where that buffer one is in, but I think that's on the list to be reviewed, and a significant move away from the word shall. But shall is everywhere in this document. So it would seem to me, at a minimum, we would wait for that meeting to occur to find out if the city council is moving away from shall, because I would hate to go through this all and then have to come back in a week and say, well, wait a minute, they don't like that approach anymore. And no matter what we do, they have the final vote. So, and then the third comment I have is, and maybe these all fall in the dupes. So where would I look in the section for, I'll show my ignorance here, but we were just looking at something that was a dupe from another section. Where is the actual ones we're saying go do?
They're attached to the staff report, and they're also starting on page, in the element, if you have a copy in front of you, hopefully you do, page 63. So 63, 64, 65, and 66, and 67 are the proposed new goals, policies, and programs.
Okay, thank
And
you.
I attached it to the staff report as a separate exhibit, just so it's kind of front and center.
It's at 63. That's where all the
Yeah,
goals.
okay. So for example, on page 64, EJ 2.2. This says, we shall identify and address gaps in access to residential and commercial recreational facilities. So We're gonna go do a big plan, is that what we're gonna do, or?
Can you repeat what goal or policy or program?
I'm on page 64,
Okay, which one?
EJ 2.2.
EJ 2-2?
And healthcare and healthy foods is not one of the four to start with.
Let me repeat that just so it was a little different than what you
Yeah.
said. Actively advocate to ensure all community members have access to healthy foods, education, green spaces, and medical services.
He was referring to EJ-2.2.
Oh, okay. The city shall identify and address gaps in access to residential, commercial, recreation facilities, natural open space areas, and physical and mental health resources to help ensure that these resources are equally available to all residents.
So that's a shall, and that says we're gonna go do a study or something. Is that how you would read that?
I don't interpret that as a study.
Well, what is it then? If I'm gonna identify it, what am I gonna do?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, it's a very valid question. Maybe we can get the consultant on the line to assist. I don't think that means necessarily a study, but obviously they're saying identify and address gaps in access. Sherida, could you see if we can get them on the line? I think they would be able to clarify a little bit on that one.
But Commissioner Bridge, right, when you talk about that, right?
Say again?
When you just mentioned that, right, that kind of contradicts, right? Because we're segmenting it to an A area, but it says community, right? Community is not a specific set area, it's the entirety of
I
Lompoc.
agree with you. I started at that level. In fact, I'll kind of get to my last point, which is one of the big things we just got told is a good proportion of our houses are at risk of lead poisoning. Why don't we have something in here that says we're gonna go find out about lead and put whatever the right words are, a program together that solves that problem instead of making sure we provide healthy food, but when you look at the food desert charts in there, there's no food desert. There's plenty of access to healthy food in this city. So,
We do have the consultant on the line, and
cool.
it's a very valid point, and maybe, I believe it's Michael Gibbons. He's with Meteor Harnish, same consultant that helped us with the housing element. So, Sherida, do you want to put him on?
Yes, Michael?
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Commission. Michael Gibbons with Mintier Harnish. Thank you so much for allowing us to present to you this evening. So in regards to Policy 2.2, that's something that it's called a self-mitigating or a self-implementing policy. And so a shall statement in there isn't necessarily requiring a study. What it is requiring, though, is that as the city, as the planning staff go through the application review process, as they are looking at new projects or new businesses coming in, that they look at it through an equitable lens. They ensure that if there are multiple mental health or, as an example, medical services, and there's a cluster of those, maybe looking at and suggesting other locations so that all residents have equal access. Not requiring a study. This is something that can really and it's something that really already is kind of taking place through the application review process. Now that's just, we have a policy that actually backs up that process.
The Commission, does that help a little bit, or do you have follow-up?
So when we have a project come in here, you're going to have an evaluation done of that project to see whether it addresses gaps in our recreation? That's what we're doing? That's what you're saying you're gonna do?
So is it a
Or is
sense?
this just boilerplate that we put in these things so we feel good about what we're doing?
Well, one of the things that staff would look at, Commissioner Bridge, is when a project does come in. As our consultant said, we are going to, just like any other general plan policy, look at, is there equal access? How does it affect those areas of the community that have inequities, and I explained tonight some of those inequities. So we would be doing that analysis, we would be doing that review in the general plan, just like we do with any other project. Remember, the general plan is supposed to be general. If you get too specific, you can get into trouble, because then it's can be difficult sometimes to apply to everything. So it's supposed to be general, it's not supposed to, sometimes when you get real specific, you can get into some problems. We'll leave it at that. So we have this document now to look at certain census tracts, certain areas of town that we know have concerns. So if a project comes in where we know we have concerns because of those factors that I brought up, then that will help us to better address those areas. Maybe the materials that go out, they're only in English, but they should also be in Spanish, because it's in those that area of concern. That would be something that
All
we
right,
want to take into
let me
consideration.
pick on another one then. Let's go to page 66, item A. So the next time we do a capital improvement review, which I assume comes up in the budget process, there's going to be a specific criteria that the city council evaluates their assignment of the capital improvement budget. So I'm going to see on a chart some kind of grading, because it says I'll prepare a defined set of criteria for equitable distribution of capital improvements. So the next time the capital improvement budget comes from Dean or wherever the heck they come from, there's going to be a column that says, we have ranked this in this criteria, because that's what that says.
But does a current capital improvement budget even exist? Like,
Yeah, no, they go through it every 2 years.
Yeah.
But they do, but from a breakdown of that, right, you have your core capital improvement, but then you have your sub-budgets, right? You look at Parks and Rec, there's really nothing, right? Because they're going off a general fund, right? So as I read this, as you're consistent, you're saying here, like, you holistically look at a core capital improvement plan or a budget that goes across the city itself. We don't have that. We have a capital where we have like little, hey, we're gonna buy these, we're gonna dip it out of the general fund, but we really don't have a true capital improvement plan for the city.
Well, no, we do. I didn't bring anyone from the city manager's office or Public Works, et cetera, but no, the city clearly has a capital improvement plan, without getting into specific subsets and things like that. But yeah, Commissioner Bridge is absolutely right. We would have to change it, so there's that criteria.
And those census tracts, by this definition, would take priority.
Well,
Or they'd
priority
rank higher.
priority is a strong word, but we would be required, and I'm almost positive they have a consultant to help with the capital improvement plan, and our city attorney's office would help us to make sure that that criteria is in the next capital improvement plan. And I might be wrong, and Sheridan might even know this, but I think it's every 7 years. I'm trying to remember it's a long period of time, and it's a lot of money, and a lot of times things are not done during that period.
At the
But-
last city council meeting, they said they were going to redo the capital improvement project at the next budget cycle.
I thought they recently did, but I apologize if I don't have that information handy. But yeah, it would need to comply with that. The short answer is yes. I don't have all the specifics of what that criteria would be, but we certainly would use this element to help put together the criteria. So let me give you, I think sometimes it's better to give some examples. So let's say they're gonna build a new park, and let's say that area lacks a park. So that might be on the high priority list, especially if it's in those tracks that we spoke of tonight. Now, do they have to? It says we need to have a set of criteria, but I don't think it forces them necessarily to build a park in that area. But it does need to be considered.
Okay, well, if they're gonna do it, and that's what you're presenting to the city council, and they understand that that's now being added to their, I have Okay, and it's gonna be done in 2022 to 2025, according to this chart. So it's done next year. Right? I'm
Yeah,
reading-
we do
I'm
have the
reading that?
timeline, so yes.
Okay. And then annually, we're gonna do something to bring substandard housing into compliance. So that's item B. How are we gonna do that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Commissioner Bridge?
Sure, I'm sorry. I apologize for being so quick. The next one down says the city shall bring substandard housing units into compliance.
Yeah, that one's actually pretty easy. And the reason why is they already, there's laws that help with substandard housing. I don't know if our attorney wants to elaborate on that, but that's already something that is in place when it
Well,
comes to substandard
But-
housing.
But you're saying that what you just described is establishing requirements. It certainly is not bringing it into compliance. That's just establishing the standards. This kind of implies that you're going to go out and you've got people living in houses full of lead, which I'm sure don't meet the compliance, and you're going to go get them in compliance. It doesn't say you're going to go establish criteria and create a program to monitor or some, this says you're going to bring them into compliance.
Right, and so there are already units that have been identified in the city. I didn't bring that tonight, but there already are housing units in the city that need help. They need improvements. And if it's often brought up through the inspections, especially if it has an affordable covenant, or it's often brought up through people complain and there's a code enforcement case open. And so, yeah, we would have to make sure that they come into compliance. And sometimes the city attorney's office gets involved. I don't want to say any names, but there are certain slumlords in town. We'll leave it at that. And they absolutely need to come into compliance, and this would support that
Who
effort.
covers the cost for that? Is that come out of the city budget? Or are you enforcing the owners to take care of it? I mean, how does it, who pays for it, I guess the question is.
The property owner has
The
to pay, but
property
the
owner
city
has-
says, hey, you have a, termite infested structure.
Okay, so this is a code enforcement
Yeah,
thing,
but also through the California Building Code as well. If they go out there and do an inspection and
code
it's
enforcement. It's
substandard.
literally right there, code enforcement.
Yep, well, that's, yeah.
Is the consultant still on? Because, we've had a bunch of these come through over time, and she answered my question because I felt like an idiot, because I've looked over this thing 3 times, right? To me, when you come to this conclusion, like, what were the data sets, right? There needs to be kind of like a little chart, right? The data sets, the polling data, the number of people, and if you go back to that map, right? If you go back to that map, what were the number of people, right?
Hold on
that-
1 second.
Okay.
Okay, so, yeah, lots of data. So all the data is in there. And let me just go back to one of the slides that I gave. All of the data is coming from these screens right here. The website is really good, actually. I looked at it one more time before the meeting. So if you look at the Cal Enviro screen 4.0 and the EJ screen, almost all of the data is coming from these 2 websites, although they are pulling in other data like, the median incomes and things like that, but a lot of the data is straight from these websites.
But I mean, it's key when you look at that, right? So if you go back to the map, right, D, of the number of people that live there, residents, right, you maybe have 500 residents.
Is this the map, Commissioner?
The next one,
Okay.
right? So when you look at that, say you look at D as you go towards H, right? Were there 4 people polled out of 500 people who live there? Were there 2 people, right? Because those numbers, that's what's key. And that's my concern, and I'm bringing this up is because that area, when you look at the political election just in the city, right? There's not votes going out there. So it's just as you come down to this conclusion, right, of these things, right? It's just,
I think you're referring to sampling size. I wasn't going to go into that tonight since that's not the city's data, But the
But
consultant,
I think it's key though, right? Because if you're only polling 6 people, right? 6 people out of 500 that live in that quadrant, right? That it's a skewed view of presenting real data and inputs back.
I don't believe, Commissioner, that's the way they do it, but I don't, could we pull the consultant on the line one more time, Sherda?
He is back on the line, but I would like to let you know that we do have a capital improvement program on the city's finance webpage from fiscal years.
You're gonna have to talk into the microphone.
On the City of Lompoc's finance website, we do have the capital improvement program for fiscal years 2017-18 through 2022-23. So they are probably in the process of starting to do our next 15-year capital improvement program.
Great, thank you. And then we'll get the consultant on the line. If we can pull him.
Hi, can you hear me? Sorry, there's a delay on my end.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. So, what we're doing is we have data sets that come from 2 main sources. One is from a state, so Cal, and that's through state of California, called Cal EnviroScreen 4.0. It's a state-recognized, state-provided data set that looks at census tracts and compares them to other census tracts in California specifically. We also then pulled a federal data set. So federal government, they have, it's called EJ Screen, that's from the EPA, and that's all of those data sets. What you are seeing in the element is kind of twofold. We have the data sets that we've pulled from the state and from the federal government, and then we also have the kind of lived experience, if you will, from residents on the ground, from the community engagement. And so you'll see that kind of feedback in the community engagement portion up front of the element. And so, yes, while we wish we would have had more turnout, the statistics, the data sets, the findings, those aren't taken into consideration by public input. Those are straight from the government. So that's where you're finding. So I would say that, no, we're not skewing these results fortunately, no, we're not skewing results based on the amount of input received through the process.
So if I could make a quick comment here. Yeah, I think there's 2 things here. One is the identification of the areas that are demographically disadvantaged, which is those green highlighted. Yeah, that one definitely comes from a source that has weight. I mean, California data, the federal data. I don't think we can necessarily dispute those. But then there's the other thing, which is like the assessment of what the environmental problems that plague those areas have come basically through the polling of probably pretty low number of people that might have those ideas that, think that pesticide is an issue, or that, lead is an issue, or that, which might be true. I'm not saying that that's not valid, but it is a little bit more questionable, I think, than the area where we have, again, the most disadvantaged population. So, I mean, are we sure that, because I think that's what we were talking about in the beginning, right? Pesticide, yeah, I would think pesticide is more of an issue on the west side, and that the risk management plan facilities are probably more on northeast and north. And what were the other issues of the 4 issues?
Even traffic proximity,
Yeah,
right?
traffic proximity, okay.
there's-
I mean,
there's
but
no
that's kind of spread out all over H and all over 246, all over Ocean, which I guess Ocean, yes, Ocean actually doesn't really bisect that area. It borders it at the south.
Just to clarify, Chair, so they use a measuring distance of 1,700 feet.
Okay.
So that's why you could say it affects a lot more, but they have to use a
Yeah,
measure.
I understand,
So
but
1,700 feet.
I think I see some, I agree that those issues are probably more spread out throughout the city than just concentrated in those areas. Now, one could make the argument that, okay, those areas are already disadvantaged by themselves because of the population of the demographics, and on top of that, you add those problems. But those problems are not concentrated in those areas. I mean, they might be felt in those areas because, again, you interview people in those areas, but you could have interviewed people, you know, on the north edge or south of that area, and probably would tell you the same issues. Like, we're worried about pesticides, we're worried about traffic, and we're worried about hazardous materials, and we're worried about.
There's a fallacy in what you've just said. And the fallacy is they've started with a preconceived characterization of who suffers more from environmental injustice. And that predetermination is race, ethnicity, and poverty.
Well, I think, yeah,
Well,
I think it
just
start.
let me finish.
Yeah, sure.
So when you come to that, you get to that place first. However, if you flipped it around and said, no, what are our environmental problems? And then who is impacted by those the most? If you wanted to then say, okay, well, the green area, 1,700 feet from the Bailey corridor, those people need some attention, and that attention needs to be focused on pesticides, then I'd have a plan that I could go address. But what we've done is we said, well, they're poor and they're Hispanic, and therefore that's the area we're going to focus on.
That's pretty much what I said.
Okay,
So,
well, I
yeah.
apologize.
Yeah. What I was saying is that they have determined, you know, the determination that is a disadvantaged area, period. Comes from.
So all the
comes
problems
from.
exist.
No, that comes from demographics and comes from the data from those two websites. So, okay, we have an area where poverty is higher, where scholarization is lower, you know. Yeah, I agree, like race, ethnicity, I don't really care. I still struggle to understand why those are considered, you know,
certainly not the
reasons for
minority.
disadvantage, although yes, there might be a historical reason for that those are disadvantage. But the real reasons are like there's poverty, there's density, there's low scholarization. Those are the areas that have that. But what I was saying, like the environmental concerns are not necessarily concentrated in those areas. So I guess the fundamental thing that we struggle to understand here is why are we marrying the two? Right, and saying, these are the areas that need attention. I think these are the areas, yes, that need attention, but they need attention for probably other issues than necessarily the environmental
And I
ones
agree with you.
that are more spread out throughout the whole city.
And I just want to take it one more step. If those are really the areas, which I can fully accept, and I can even accept if there's a subcategory of those in the green, but let's address them. Let's just not.
I think it's more of an economic development issue than an environmental. It's an economic development justice issue rather than an environmental justice issue, in my opinion. But then again, our hands are kind of tied by the law that wants us to do it. So I don't know.
But I'm reading this, I'm struggling. Like, I'm severely struggling on this, right? Like, because when I look at that and living on D Street for when I first moved here, right? For me, like an environmental justice concern that I would have is the aging sewer pipes, right?
So if they interviewed you, that would have been one of the items.
That's that
what-
area, right? That's where when you start to look at where those things apply, I feel that there's so many inconsistencies in this recommendation that's gonna go up to the city council, right? That it needs to be reviewed because like even the risk management plans, there's no industry in those areas, right? The only thing that I think that, in Braxton's opinion, is really the lead exposure. Yeah, there are older homes there, so lead exposure, yeah, that's definitely gonna apply. But when you see the other three.
But we also said that the majority of the houses in Lompoc in general are old and have lead. So again, spread out everywhere. The lead issue is not just concentrated in that area. Now, there's more houses in the areas, yes, because it's denser. But, you know,
Well,
that does,
let's just pretend for a minute it is lead. And let's pretend for a minute it's in that green area. Where does this plan address that? I don't see anything that, one of our number one problems, I don't, now maybe I'm missing it, but I don't see it.
You're right, Commissioner Bridge, and maybe the consultant can, I did notice that too, so it's absolutely, the lead pipes are not covered in there. I have researched this a little bit, and I've seen what other communities do, and sometimes what they'll do is apply for grants, and federal funding, state funding will come in. There's areas that are a lot worse off than we are in California that are more to the east. And it's extremely expensive, but it is happening in certain communities where they'll get a grant and they'll go in and change out all the lead pipes. We did not put anything in there. I mean, we could, and you can certainly make a recommendation that the city should apply for grant to remove lead pipes or whatever. But that is a good point, and we don't cover any new goals, policies, or programs regarding lead. So, but the element does touch on specifically lead paint. So that is something that obviously I've mentioned in my presentation, that kids can be susceptible to that, especially if it's an older home and hasn't been renovated, et cetera, and they could be prone to lead paint. I mean,
Where is it? Talk to lead paint?
the lead paint issue?
Now, I know where you found the problem. Where in the goals does it?
No, it's not.
Oh,
It's not.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not in the goals.
I would like to suggest two things to the. I'd like to suggest, one, we wait till the meeting tomorrow, because I have a feeling shalls are going to be either embraced or discontinued. And so I'd like to have that before we finalize this. And then a harder suggestion is I would like the goals, EJ1 through AJ3, to, rather than be whatever they are, be the 4 items that we said were problems. So, you know, we can go back to that 4 chart, Brian, is that possible?
Yes, absolutely.
So EJ1 would be pesticides, how we're going to have a goal of against a set of those.
But, and this is where I feel like I'm telepathing with you right now, right? We list these, but in the plan, there's no mitigation. How do we remedy that?
Well, that's what the goals are supposed to be, is to establish policies for mitigation.
yeah, so we want to tie the goals to the,
But like who? I mean, my biggest thing is you look at the risk management plan. Who enforces that? How is that done?
Well, now
right?
this is gonna sound very cold, but that's why we have staff. They're supposed to go off and bring back to us goals and policies that are gonna mitigate pesticide or risk management. And I think if we had the structure of EJ 1 through 4, we would at least be able to start focusing on the areas that require it. And if in the process of review, we determine that subdivides the green sections or identifies a different tract, then that should fall out of that. But we kind of, it seems like we've kind of said, well, this is the area, here's the problems, and we haven't connected those two.
And-
That's my,
And even the risk management plans, like I know wouldn't,
for example, a goal should be to work with the 3 or 4 organizations that have created this risk for us to find alternative ways to eliminate the chemicals that cause the risk. That might be It might not be possible, but if you're asking me on the fly to come up with a way to do it, that might be one.
But I mean, do we get down to that level of granularity? Like, I'm gonna go to Palmerville and fill up my RV with propane, right? There's a risk, there's a large-sized propane tank there.
Yeah, but hasn't required a risk management plan.
No, yeah, that,
But
that
what,
doesn't meet the requirements.
but what does?
Well,
it's
they
in the
identified
element.
3 places.
It's in the element. It
No, but
talks
of the
about
criteria, like, does it have to have?
hazardous materials, so I don't think propane is hazardous material. It's flammable, but real quickly, before we get off track, so I agree, not everything is covered, but a lot of it is covered. For example, we don't come out and talk about lead, but it does talk about safe and sanitary housing. Cities shall establish and enforce standards that promote safe and sanitary housing. So, yeah, we don't come out and talk about the lead. Like I said, the one that's the big one is the lead paint. So that's going to be very difficult, although you can say that when someone, actually, I think there's already something, but it's in the California Building Code, that they may have to, when they're renovated, they have to dispose of it properly when they remove it from the home. But that's a renovation. It's not like, unless they come to the city and do a renovation, we're not going to go out and say, all these homes, if they have lead paint, need to be removed. I don't think you're going to want to do that.
No, but I think, for example, if this is really a environmental justice issue, we could establish a program that investigates or inspects 100 houses a year, and then has a program that provides them paint that covers their lead paint. That would be a plan.
I think that the concept here is that we would like to see the goals to be more tied, more directly tied to the environmental justice concerns that were identified. And I get it, it's the issue with the green area versus where these problems or these concerns appear. Okay, I mean, it's hard to pinpoint that, but at least to have the goals to be more directly tied, I think it would make a lot more sense in terms of having a plan that actually is consistent to what the research has shown. So I don't know if that is something that...
That's helpful. We would do, I think we've covered most of it, but I think we're getting into really small details that might be difficult to make into a goal or a
Or at
program.
least show us a little bit better how they tie to the
Okay,
those
so
goals-
I
to
did
those
bring
goals.
up the safe and sanitary housing, so that's another one. So the pesticide use is very tricky. So unless the pesticide, and I don't know if the consultant wants to piggyback on this, unless the pesticide is like prohibited, it's going to be very difficult. One of the things that EJ Element brings into play is all the agricultural fields are actually not within the city. It's outside the city. So that it can kind of be difficult to regulate something that's not within the city limits proper. So, and the chemicals they bring up in the EJ Element, those are all legal.
Yeah, but even if
are able to be
even if
used.
the goal stated something like the city should, not shall, we'll see, or shall, depending on tomorrow, should proactively or whatever, actively engage with the farming community to try, I mean, at least something, you know, okay, we're gonna try, we know it's hard, we know it's not under our control, they're not in the city, but at least there's a goal to at least to try and engage with the farming community to regulate, or not regulate is a bad word, but, you know, to address the pesticide situation, something like that. I agree, it has to be vague in general, but at least one could say, all right, we have answered one of the concerns that was brought up by, you know, the population or some of the population in those areas.
It was brought up already by Commissioner Bridge, very good comment, but we do already have a 200-foot buffer. Okay, so if something goes in, kind of like the Briar Creek development, they had to build a 200-foot buffer between the urban uses and the ag uses. I personally think that development I can't take credit for it, but came out really well. There's a very large buffer there. So that does help. We already have that in the general plan, and that is addressing incompatible uses, ag and urban. But Commissioner Bridge also made a point that tomorrow night, ag is going to be discussed. And there has been, I'll just say, a pretty strong consensus, but we'll see tomorrow night, to not get too involved with ag. So you're talking about getting involved in ag, so I'm just kind of bringing it to your attention. We'll see what happens, but just want to bring it up.
Well, I think you're caught between a rock and a hard place, and I understand that. But where we're struggling is we've paid a consultant who's come up with what are the concerns in Lompoc. And it seems reasonable to me, and I think to the rest, is that we least organized our goals around what are the concerns. So, for example, access to health care and healthy foods, which is a big, bold goal section, is not one of the four. And so if we could at least get them organized around that, even if the solution, you take these same policies and re-wicker them into the categories that address those items, and perhaps when you're doing that, a couple more come up, perhaps a couple go away. That's what I think we're saying we'd like to see.
Yeah.
I was just going to chime in that some of these requirements, like for example, the food environment, are essentially required by SB 1000. So they're within the statute itself of what the city should be looking into. But, I mean, if the commission wants, I'm sure the consultant can go in and look into how they could fit it into these specific categories. But it is something that the statute itself says this is what the environmental justice plan should have.
Well, perhaps you have a fourth goal, which is meet the state requirements.
I mean, we could certainly sharpen our pencil and go back. I think we've covered some of them, but I think you have a good point that some of them are so broad that they may not specifically say lead, and they may not say, traffic proximity. So, but I think it's supposed to be broad, so like when a project comes in, I'll just give an example. Let's say 100 apartments are within 500 feet of a noisy major arterial. I think based on this element, when the commission is reviewing that project, they might say, hey, do they have double pane windows? Is there any noise buffers? How are you going to mitigate noise and pollution impacts from a project that's only 500 feet from a major arterial? I think we're covered here. I honestly think we're covered without actually saying those exact words. I think we're covered. The pesticide use is a tough one. We will try our best, but the pesticide use is really tough when it's not within the city. So, and then the lead and the facility proximity, I think we can, again, look at that a little
You can
closer.
still make it as vague as you want. You don't have to use the word lead. You can use dangerous metals or dangerous substances. I mean, but just to see some sort of like logical correlation between those four concerns and the goals, I think would just make the document clearer, more understandable by the general public. The general public would probably say, hey, look at that. They took our concerns and our suggestions and they actually put them there. Even though it doesn't say traffic proximity exactly or pesticide use exactly. But, you can be creative. Consultants can be creative and just kind of like by using the broadest language possible, but organize them 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, whatever is required, 5 and 6 maybe, whatever is required by SB 1000 as well, because those, have to be a given. But I think it's just like, it would just, be better received, I think, by the public, by the council. You know, it just would make more sense. I agree with
Okay.
Commissioner Bridge.
And the only thing I ask, if we can go back, like, I'm really struggling in what Mr. Gonzalez said, because Commissioner Gonzalez is sitting next to me. We have a systemic problem of poverty in our community, right? And we can't just pinpoint it to that specific area, because you can go down the street from LVMS, right? And you got a house. We all know the impoverished people in the community. And we just cannot pinpoint it to a geographic area, because it's a community-wide thing. And I really think, I don't know what your guys' take on that is, but that map really needs to reflect, it should be citywide, not
Yeah,
little-
well, I don't think, okay, again, I think the scope of the law requires us to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Emery Garcia, requires us to identify specific problem areas, and we cannot just apply it to the whole city. Is that correct?
Well, we do have to, and I'll let the assistant attorney in just a second, so we have to rely on the data. So even though I agree poverty is a problem, and poverty is a
The
problem in
data-
a larger area, but the data is saying that those are the areas that have the lowest income based on the median income in Lompoc, and then also comparing it to the median income in the county. Those particular tracks are low. So we have to address the data in that area. We don't have the budget to go out and do a new study or get our own data. We have to use the data that's already there, but I think the attorney wants to speak.
So then it's concerning to me, because then there's just another layer of skewness, is we've based it upon ethnicity. And that really upsets me. That really truly upsets me, because that should not count in this poll, in this data.
Right. So, real quickly, just want to say, so essentially, this environmental justice, according to the SB 1000, it's making us look at the numbers, those certain numbers from, in our case, the community of focus. That's where we're supposed to be making sure that it's, that there's the same equity as the rest of the city. But what we've come to see is our 4 major problems are addressed to the whole city in general and not necessarily just that area.
Just to chime in, that might be a state legislature issue when it came to drafting this language. I mean, every city is different, so it could also be, for example, city of Los Angeles, where ethnicity might come into play, in communities next to LAX, right? But for our community, it might be a bit different.
Well, I would suggest one other thing when you're going back, because you're correct in what you're saying. So we can identify what the problems are, and we can even say these communities are experiencing poverty, but we can take citywide solutions. Doesn't, at least I didn't read anything I've read, doesn't say that the solution can't go citywide. For example, Nick is correct. I have been adamantly opposed to in lieu of fees, because I believe in lieu of fees causes poverty to coalesce around specific lower price spots. So if we wanted, and I don't think we do, but if we wanted, one of our policies could be to eliminate in lieu of fees. That would be to create some environmental justice in that area. It would be a citywide policy. I don't think it'll fly, but I'm just saying, if there's solutions, the solutions don't have to just reside in that area. And that might be a way to address some of the issues you're talking about.
Well, even the other piece of this here that's not listed in here, household income and poverty status and all these things, we have no business. People leave, right? And when they have to cover the cost of their house and this stuff and gas, right? We're not bringing business into the community, right? So when we have people leave, that's where that real struggle comes from. It's a real struggle for them, that how do we allure and bring business? I mean, That should be a goal, right, of this. It's like, oh, well, it all goes twofold.
Yeah, I think the scope of this element is not necessarily to limit the action to the problem area, but to make sure that whatever action is applied to the city doesn't exclude those areas from accessing them. That we make sure that those areas are not forgotten when things, business, whatever, parks, whatever improvements, we give into the area includes those problem areas. I think that's probably not very well stated in the law objective of this. Okay, yeah, I think we need a motion.
I make a motion, we table this and bring it back at the next meeting with input from the staff as to the general consensus that comes out of tomorrow's meeting.
Okay, and then you want to add the reorganization of the goals around the 4 problems? Or
Why don't we
or later?
do what I just said? I'd
And
like
then
to,
see later.
well,
and then
then
we'll
you
see.
can put something
Okay.
else on the table if you
All
want.
right, so just to table after the determinations of tomorrow's meeting. Do we have a second?
Oh, before you vote, I can clarify the motion. So we will bring it back. It probably won't be the next meeting. We probably won't be able to bring it back that quickly. Do you actually want us to take a stab, a draft, to address the issues that you brought up this evening? Or do you only want us to bring it back?
I do, but I don't want that to be part of this motion.
Okay.
Okay, and now, so maybe it's to strike out those,
Sure,
Include
and you
strike-
can include the strikeouts of that. So,
Okay.
So we're only bringing it back for a discussion, including what happens at the workshop?
right, because there'll be another motion here in a moment.
oh, okay, so there's going to be a second motion. All right, so do we have a second for
Second.
this one? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, this first motion as a go for
And
0.
I'd like to make a motion that in the next draft we receive, whenever that is, that it includes a review for reorganizing around the 4 specific identified concerns. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, do I have a second?
I second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Aye, ayes have it 4-0. Thank you. That concludes item number 2. And we move to new business. Any new business?
1 second while I finish my notes.
Sure. I'm sorry. A little too quick.
All right, thank you for your patience. No new business at this time on that.
Thank you. Okay, we open again for oral communications. I see someone rising, so please restate your name for the record.
Nick Gonzalez, resident of Lompoc. I think that's warranted, what you did. What I've seen when I was following this initially, think of reparations, like something that historically happened in the past, and now we're gonna make up for it. And this is the group of demographics that we're gonna make up for. How they got there, I mean, they had the same kind of workshops, outreach. Again, a lot of the problems that they're trying to address, we don't historically see here. I mean, we can point to a handful of items. But think on this line. We've gotten sued before in the city for failing to comply with certain elements, right? So now you've identified some problems. So making a solution that addresses those core census tracts can also address the city as a whole. Just don't make it so cumbersome that it's a financial burden upon the city. But with today's technology, you can put a monitoring station in one of those districts for pollution, pesticides, and put another one somewhere else. You can require that if any housing be built before, or any housing under renovation prior to, say, 1978, whenever that lead was, I have a lead cert card that I trained so that I don't expose anyone that I work on a unit to lead exposure, right? I mean, it's a training. You can make sure the workers have that, right? That would be a way to mitigate those types of items. So there are things that you could do They might be too specific, but you can just generally say, ensure that anybody that comes in for permit for a renovation, demolition of a pre-78, make proper controls, right? To limit exposure to the tenants in these areas. But that could be a citywide policy. But thank you for taking the time to look at it, though, because these are the kind of things that later, once you identify the problem, that the groups come in, and I've seen it happen, and I'm seeing it happen in California, and then they litigate based on your failure to address those concerns.
Thank you. Anyone else on the phone?
No one on the phone?
All right, we're going to close oral communications. Any written communications?
No written communications.
All right, Director Staff Communications.
Yeah, I have quite a few items on here. Wanted to give you some updates on what we're doing with the other general plan amendments. So the safety element is still being looked at and updated based on comments we got from CAL FIRE. So we'll continue to work on that with CAL FIRE and the Forestry Department. The general plan housing element might be scheduled next month. We just the other day got an updated element that, as long as that looks okay, I have a meeting with the consultant tomorrow. As long as it looks okay, we're going to send it back to HCD to have a look at it. If they believe that the comments were adequately addressed, we'll put it on the next Planning Commission meeting. The circulation element, I had given a few months ago a timeline on bringing that back to the commission. We are behind. A couple things have come up since I gave that timeline. One is there's a builder's remedy application that was submitted to the county. We have a meeting next week with LAFCO and the county executives to discuss that particular instance of a large development of over 300 homes that would be built on a portion and not all of the Bodger project. So there's a lot going on with that regarding several aspects. And so because of that, the circulation element will probably need to now address that property in those areas in regards to maybe new collector streets, new bike paths and pedestrian paths. And that area is not great for circulation, so we need to address it. There's also some other issues that are kind of swirling, but we're trying to bring that back to, we had a call yesterday with the consultant. So we're getting back on track based on direction from department heads and getting that, talking to the developer and the applicant about the builder's remedy for the Bodger project. So more to come on that. And then November 13th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting is going to need to be, if we have items, it can't be in this room. They're doing major tech upgrades to this room, which is really, really exciting because it needs it. I've already reserved, if we do have items, to have this meeting at the Dick DeWeese Community Center. I think Commissioner Bridge remembers when we did a housing workshop. There's like the main auditorium, and then there's one off to the side. I think you attended that about a year and a half ago. We would have it in that room off to the side. So stay tuned. I wanted to give you really early notice on that this room will not be available, the council chambers. And then lastly is every 2 years, we have a joint meeting between the Planning Commission and the City Council. That one's coming up very quickly, June 4th, 2024. I wanted to open it up to the commission and find out if you would like to have the joint meeting or not have the joint meeting. If you are, then we'll just move status quo. The city clerk organize that. It's not designed to be long, and it's not even really designed for staff to do any presentations or anything. It's just a time where the council and the planning commission can meet together and talk about whatever they want to talk about. So do you want to have a joint meeting with the city council on Tuesday, June 4th at 6 p.m.? That's the question.
Can we establish an agenda?
I would have to work with the clerk's office. I think you can, but it's not supposed to be heavy, meaning it's almost like a formality where it's just a time to talk. You certainly can. If there's items you want to bring up, I can work with the clerk on that. but it's not supposed to be real heavy.
Yeah, it's
Well-
not a time to make decisions together or
Right,
something. This is nothing.
What I would like to suggest an agenda if we decide we want to do the meeting.
What would you put on the agenda so I
I
can
would like to
communicate that?
see a general agreement of a regular scheduled frequency of updating the code,
The zoning code?
yeah.
Okay.
Because we always seem to do it kind of haphazard. I don't mean that in a critical fashion.
I think that wouldn't actually, Commissioner Bridge, actually be on the agenda per se. They would just set the agenda, you talk, and then you can bring up whatever you want.
Yeah,
So,
but then
if you
you're,
want-
then you're surprising people. I don't.
I'll try. I'll try my
I'd like
best.
to rather at least have the topic, everybody knows that.
I will give it my best effort.
Up to you guys too.
And it's only 30 minutes, right?
Yeah, but
I-
we'd only be talking about, hey, do we want to do this every 6 months on a regular fashion? Take a section of the code, look at it, and
I know in
review it?
other times they're always rushed and they're out. That's my only concern.
He's right. It usually is about 30 minutes. And when it comes to the code, as you know, we're short-staffed. We're going to try to, in the next budget cycle, add another planner. But it's going to be dependent on budget and staffing. I'll just tell you that right now. And right now, we don't have the staffing or the budget to do a lot of code amendments. So we're already behind on getting updated with the new housing laws. So I just want to be very upfront and transparent about that we don't have staffing or the budget to do any major updates.
All right, so do we want to have a meet and greet? with-
Sure, we need a meeting then.
Yeah, I think the consensus is that we don't need to have the meeting.
That we do not? Oh, okay, I just heard that you wanted to talk.
No, well, if it.
I only want to do it if it's productive. If the thing I want to do can't be accomplished appropriately, then I don't want to.
Is that a consensus that all of you believe that we shouldn't have a joint meeting?
I've done multiple of these and multiple commissions, and they're not productive. So I don't feel that it's even worth
Yeah.
having.
I think we have at least 3.
Yeah, I guess that we could
Or-
word it, we don't need it, but if the council wants to do it, we do it.
Yeah, I guess,
Okay, I'll tell the clerk, no joint meeting on the 4th.
yeah.
Okay, that's all I have for the staff communications.
Thank you very much. Any commission requests? Commissioner
I
Bridge?
just wanted to make sure that you were aware that I recognize the amount of work that went into this effort, and I do recognize your short staff. So while I have empathy and I feel sad or bad that I'm, perhaps the genesis of some of these changes,
No, it's
But it's
okay, we're
not
always
for-
open to
it's
improving
not
it
for
and making
lack
it
of
better.
recognizing the good work you guys do.
Thank you very much.
And that is shared by, I think, everybody. All right, anything else?
Yeah,
Commissioner Braxton?
I'm going to comment on, I know I asked tough questions, but I just think there were a lot of open-ended things, and my general comment on this was it's like you could drive a bus through it, and it's written that way for a reason, but the more clarity we have, I think it's easier when they sit here, and then they kind of have it in layman's terms, it'll go a lot faster than we had tonight.
Thank you. Anything else? All right, then I move that we adjourn the Lompoc Planning Commission to our next regular meeting at 6:30 PM on Wednesday, June 12, 2024. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, we are
Aye.
adjourned. Thank you.